Well, looky there. I've got those bars that were in the way cut out. And if you look right across here, I've got a front motor mount already built. This is one of the bars that was set in here like that, blocking my way, and I cut it out. And I think I'm going to take me some square tubing and notch it and put it on the back side of this and bring it up to here. Because if I've got it notched and I've got it mounted on the back side here and welded in, then it's going to leave me room to get to this. Plus there's all kinds of support here for my front A-arms. I guess that's what they're called on this, is an A-arm. Kind of looks like an A-arm to me. Anyway, but that'll give me access to get to these bolts in case I need to change these bushings out in here or anything like that. So I just need to measure from the bottom of this up to here and take my square tubing and cut it. And once I get it cut from there to there, I can clean up all this metal here and weld them in, and I should be good to go. I'm not too worried about this line right here, by the way. This is a rear brake line, and the back brakes have not worked on this thing since I've had it. And I don't expect them to work anytime soon. So if I burn this up or whatever, I'm not too worried about it because I got to replace the back brakes anyway. But honestly, I have a lot of fun with just having front brakes. You know, I let off the gas, it slows down, I pay attention to what I'm doing, and, you know, use the front brake sparingly. And I can always lock up the front brakes and do donuts. So anyway, I'm going to get back to it. Well, it looks like two 8.5 inchers are going to get the job done. Yeah, y'all can take that as you want. Anyway, let's go ahead and get cutting. That's one. Comes number two. By the way, this chop saw, this metal chop saw, is a Chicago Electric. It's a 14-inch, and I've had this in here for 2 years. People make fun of Harbor Freight tools, but if you are on a budget, I don't see any problem at all with running Harbor Freight tools as far as, you know, getting the job done or whatever, especially for hobby shops. I mean, it does a great job. You know, I have no issues with it whatsoever. You just don't want to put a toothed blade on it, which, let me unplug this. Bad camera work. Okay. Anyway, if you put the tooth blades on these, it's going to overwork this engine. It's not going to last. Just go ahead and keep buying the cutting blades, the composite cutting blades like I'm running here. This blade has been on this saw for a year now, and if you guys are just doing this kind of stuff that I am, you know, you don't need to spend $500 to $1,000 for a chop saw to cut metal. Just go ahead and buy you a cheap Harbor Freight Chicago Electric, which that's what that is, and you guys see how it works. It works really well. Just don't force it, you know. Let the saw do the work, don't let your arm do the work, and it'll last you a long time. And you can see, you didn't see that. Anyway, you can see how well it does. I mean, it cuts really square. You can slide that out. Drop your piece of metal in here. Pull that down, measure from the end to the blade. Flip that over. You can quick draw it, tighten it up, cut your 90s. If you loosen up this Allen bolt right here, you can spin this and cut 45s, 15s, 30s, whatever you want to cut. You can set your depth on this saw and notch tubing. That way you can partially, you can cut a V in tubing with this and not cut all the way through, and bend the tubing so that you can do bends for exhaust. I mean, there's quite a bit you can do with this saw, and it'll last you a long time as long as you just don't force the tool to do more than it needs to do. If you're doing thick wall stuff or whatever, just let it take its time and eat through it. Eventually it's going to cut it. You can't get into a hurry with some of these cheaper tools, but if you take care of them and don't beat the crap out of them, they're gonna last you a long time. Not to mention the fact, if this saw right here burns up, I'll go to Harbor Freight and I'll go buy another brand new one just like it, and I'll wait 2 weeks, throw a burn up saw in the box and take it back and say it didn't work and give my money back. So, you can always do that too, if you guys feel like being underhanded and sneaky and all that. But anyway, like I said, this saw, it does great. It does what I need it to do, and I have no complaints whatsoever. Not with any of their tools, actually. I'm fixing to burn some welds on this. Thing is, though, if you don't have access to a welder, you could always drill holes and stuff and bolt it. But if you're dealing with tubing instead of flat stock, make sure that you put a sleeve inside that tubing so you don't crush the tubing. Because if you don't put a sleeve inside that tubing, whenever you bolt it, what's going to happen is you're going to have some flex, and that flex is going to bend that tubing in, and you're going to lose the tension on that bolt. So make sure you put something inside that tubing if you're just going to bolt it instead of weld it. As far as welders, you can go to Harbor Freight and get a cheap welder. The little 110 MIG that I had, it was 90 amp. It worked really well, and you guys saw in a previous video that I gave that to my buddy Brad for his birthday, and I upgraded to the MIG 170 from Harbor Freight. It was right at 200 bucks, but it does a lot better job. The only thing, I mean, it'll do thicker material, it'll definitely do heavier welds, but you just got to make sure that you're careful you don't burn through the metal, because it's real easy to do with a 220 MIG as opposed to a 110 MIG. Alright, let's get to welding. We got one bar welded in, a little bit of slag chipping and some rattle can magic, and it's going to look great, or at least kind of sort of unnoticeable, but it's going to be pretty solid. I haven't had a weld break yet, so I got one more side to do, and then we could start mocking up our engine plate. And maybe I'll throw another weld or two on the other side. I have to spin this thing around to get to it, but yeah, all my builds are budget builds, and they don't have to be pretty as long as they're functional. You guys are going to see that. Here's you a view of the other frame, I don't know, replacement bar. Anyway, there's you another view of this side here that I'm mocking up so that I can have more adjustment on my engine plate. So we're going to weld this in, and Then we can figure out how to make an engine plate and a rear mount to go there. I'm thinking a bar to fit in between the frame all the way across here, and then holding off on the uprights to mount the plate to until I get the plate made, and then I could see what height I need to adjust to get the angle of the engine right. I'm just kind of going, you know, building as I go. That's about the best way I figured out I could do stuff. I just kind of start at one point and just kind of build as I go and adapt as I go, and it works out. It works out okay. A word of caution when you weld: wear cotton or leather. Don't wear flannel. Flannel might be a decent idea because it's got long sleeves, but do not wear flannel when you weld. When you wear flannel, flannel has a bunch of tiny hairs sticking up on it, and when you weld wearing flannel, if a spark hits that, you can light yourself on fire real quick, real easy. So wear cotton or leather when you weld. Do not wear flannel. It's not fun setting yourself on fire. I've seen it happen whenever I took welding in vocational school, like, oh goodness, over 20 years ago. I don't really want to think about how long ago it was, but yeah, don't wear flannel. It will set you on fire. Stick with 100% cotton, because cotton will smolder. It won't burn like polyesters or wools. You'd rather be smoldering or smoking a little bit where you could catch it, as opposed to, you know, setting yourself on fire or having some kind of a synthetic blend melt to your skin. It's not fun. Probably about the funniest thing that I had happen to me whenever I was taking welding class is I was using a plasma arc torch, and I was cutting a piece of 1/2-inch plate steel, and I was sitting down. I had my leather apron on, and I had a piece of slag land on that apron, and it burnt through the apron, and it landed in my lap, and it kind of burnt some sensitive areas, and I was out of commission for a couple of months while that healed up. Let's just say that. You learn a lot about the human anatomy whenever you start welding and grinding. Let's just keep it that, you know, at that point. But always be safe. Wear safety glasses, even though you're wearing a welding hood. The auto darkening hoods are the best, because there's less of a chance of arc burn. But if you don't have one of those, learn the nod method with your helmet. So you get your welder in place, and you loosen up the knobs on your helmet, and you nod your head to close your helmet, and then you start welding. I don't know, there's a lot to it. The more you get into welding and, you know, sheet metal layout and fabrication, the more you know that, or the more you learn that you really don't know what you're doing. You know, there's always somebody out there that's going to know more. But for my rear mount, this stock that I'm going to use is 2 inches wide. So what I've done is I used a level to come straight down from the transmission, straight down, made a mark, and then I come up 2 inches from that. And I found out that it's 7 inches from this point back to there. So I need to go 5 inches from here back, and I'm not sure if you can see my mark. There's one mark, and the mark on the other side is on now. So at this point, since you don't have nothing square to come off of, you need an angle finder. And what you're going to do with the angle finder is you're going to set it on the inside of the frame, and you're going to adjust it so it matches up the inside of the frame with the angle that you have right there. Okay, and then you're going to go from the longest point to the longest point, or the shortest point to the shortest point, whichever you decide. But you want to have a point here and a point here on your longest or shortest angles, regardless, you know, depends on whether or not you want to go from the long side or the short side. But you want to set your angle. I just moved it. There. And right there. Inside of the frame. Set my angle finder. And then I'm going to tighten up my angle finder. Check it again to make sure the angle is correct. I really should have clamped this, but anyway, this gives you an idea what's going on here. There and there. Inside of the frame. Set the angle finder. There. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure inside to inside on the frame there. And once I have that measurement, that's going to be my set point for the angles that I'm going to cut for the bar that I'm going to drop on the inside edge of this frame, so that I can have a base to set my uprights for my rear mount. Okay. So I've loosened this bolt up right there so that I can adjust the angle of my fence on my chop saw. Now I'm going to take my angle finder and I'm going to adjust it to the slot right there on my chop saw. Once I get it set, I'm going to tighten it up, and as you can see, I take my Allen key to my cord. I always unplug my cord when I adjust, but I've got my Allen key taped to it so that I don't lose it, because that's a big problem that I have in this shop, is misplacing specific tools for specific jobs. And I'm going to make my first initial cut to get my first angle on my cross piece for my frame. But I want to make sure that I've got that angle correct, and I'm using the slot to line it up, and then tighten it down, and I'm checking as I tighten it to make sure I keep it straight. So now when I drop my piece of steel in there, it's going to be cut at the angle of that frame. This is going to take a little bit longer because it's heavier gauge metal. One cut done, and the second cut that I need is 7 3/4 short side to short side. So make sure your angles are opposite before you cut. So you want a short side and a long side if you're dealing with a beveled frame, which I made sure that I'm opposite. So let's go ahead and do this next cut, and then we'll clean this up to weld. Rear motor mount, ground, angled, beveled, and all that to fit in the slot for the frame with the angle. So it should be pretty easy to weld that up. So we're going to go ahead and weld that in and move on to the next step. Okay, so I got my cross beam welded in. So now I need to set a level here and come out and figure out how far I want to go out from this point and set that level, and then measure up from this beam to that level point, and cut me 2 columns or towers to set in and weld in so that I can make a rear support for my plate. I'm going to use 1/8 inch plate steel, so I shouldn't have an issue with having to have a cross beam. But if I do, I'll cut one and put it in between the 2 towers and weld that in. Anyway, yeah, we're coming along just fine so far. I'm not sure how much more I'm going to do this evening, but we'll see.